Can you remember the first time you watched or read the Witchblade comics? I can, and I think most of us were teenagers, going through our first awakening moments at that time. And Witchblade's erotic artwork was promising enough for that, but it completely subverted the expectations by introducing a noir thriller into a superhero fantasy story. During the late 90s comic boom, Witchblade was quite popular for this kind of killer combination. First introduced by Top Cow Productions in 1995, Witchblade was one of the very few comics of that time to introduce an 185-issue series featuring a female protagonist, especially when the crime genre was dominated by male superheroes and detective figures. The comic was created by Marc Silvestri, David Wohl, Brian Haberlin, and Michael Turner, but later writers from around the world were drawn to the story and reinterpreted it in their own way. For example, Gonzo adapted the lore into an anime TV show in 2006, and Kobayashi created a manga series inspired by the artifact's classic lore. Although in the original comics, Sara Pezzini becomes the most crucial wielder of this gauntlet, it is not meant to be tied to a single host at all times. From the dawn of time to the distant future, Witchblade keeps on choosing various wielders, and all of them are strictly women. In today's video, I'm going to take you on a long journey through Witchblade to explore its multiple origin stories across different adaptations. So without further ado, let's get started. The Cosmic Origin, Child of Darkness and Light. The 1995 Witchblade issue was the first ever comic series to properly show Sara Pezzini's journey as the wielder of Witchblade, and by issue 92, we got a pretty surreal experience of learning about the artifact's history and its previous wielders. The issue opens in the antique shop owned by an old man called the Curator. Sara Pezzini, wearing a bracelet, asks him to spill the tea about this mysterious thing. The Curator didn't want to tell her at first, rather wanted to avoid the discussion, but Sara is hell-bent on wanting to know its real identity and where it came from. Especially, she wanted to know what purpose this bracelet serves and why she's the one to wield it. The Curator eventually opens up, calling Sara the Chosen One, and warns her that once she learns its history, it can never be unlearned, so she had better take it as an important history lesson. As the story begins, the scene shifts to the past, and the history of the previous wielders is shown in fragmented visions or narratives created by this bracelet, called Witchblade. The first timeline we saw is 1942 in Stalingrad during World War II. A Russian female soldier is seen wielding a large weapon that covers her forearm completely, almost becoming part of her body. Now, this weapon expands like a thick rope made of sharp metal or a blade and cuts through the enemy. However, that very scene also shows that the weapon had an overwhelming effect on the woman's body and mind, making her more ferocious than ever. Then the visions shift to Paris in 1898 at a ball where we see Mademoiselle Valmont, a quite powerful figure. Then someone comes to meet and greet her, introducing himself as a secret admirer of the madam, and we learn that this admirer is Kenneth Irons. Remember the name, he'll become a very important character we'll discuss later in the video. Then the visions change again, and we're in the Turks and Caicos Islands in 1718, where Anne Bonny becomes the wielder of this weapon. Here she meets with the host of darkness, Miguel Estacado, with his herd of little demons and ghouls behind him. Next, in Japan in 1632, we're introduced to Shiori-sama, who was first misunderstood as a man wielding a living armor, but then, after she beats everyone in a fierce fight with the armor, her helmet falls down and she reveals her identity as a woman. Then the visions change and delve deeper into the past, in 1509 in Africa, when an African queen was donning it, or in the Yucatan Peninsula in 1288, when a Witchblade wielder sacrificed a man's life to summon the goddess Kukulkan. After that, we saw another pass-bearer from the Bavarian Alps in 1176, and then in 229 in Rome, where a woman fights as a gladiator and no one stands a chance of winning against her. Here we also saw how the Witchblade messes with her mind and makes her thirstier for the bloodbath. And finally, we reach the very beginning when a prehistoric woman spots a strange meteor crash, causing a huge blast where it landed. As the woman moves closer to the spot, we see that Sara is witnessing every vision while being present in that very spot. She sees that woman turning into the very first bearer of Witchblade in front of her. When she finally understood the origin, it was still not over for her. Now comes a mysterious woman in a red cloak who introduces herself as the mother of all, especially in time of need. She gives Sara a mysterious rose as a vision of creation. She tells Sara that she's been blessed with the offspring of the universe's light and dark. This is a male aspect of the universe and it needs a female host to be complete. That female host will be Sara Pezzini, and that's her true purpose. As Sara finally embraces the flower, she undergoes a massive cosmic transformation. She loses all her clothes and instead gets covered by sharp metallic armor as she emerges as a whole new transformed being from the ocean. The visions were gone, and Sara was once again thrown back to the present at the curator's shop. The curator reminds her of the burden she's been given in this life, and Sara also accepts her fate, thinking of this male aspect as her dysfunctional partner in an imperfect marriage. In the next issue, numbered 93, we saw the continuation of her internal conflicts. She's been chosen as a female host for this greater energy, while her life in reality is very lonely. Her friends are getting married, and her well-wishers are advising her to settle down, but only she knows how big a responsibility she has in her hands. However, while she contemplates her choices alone in her apartment, she first encounters a horrific vision of a woman on her glass window. The same vision, but more vividly, came to her again the next day when she was in the pool. But this time too, she finally accepts it the way it was, and embraces her identity as the wielder of this century. The historical bloodline, one soul across time. After the original Witchblade series introduced Sara Pezzini and the history of past wielders in 1995, an anthology series titled Tales of the Witchblade was created, featuring some of the strongest women of history to don this magically powerful weapon. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some of those really interesting, powerful stories. I can't help but start the discussion with one of my favorites and most notorious bearers, Anne Bonny. She pulled it off during the era of the pirates from 1960 to 1730. The story starts with Anne Bonny, the fearless leader, along with Calico Jack, William, and Mary Read, who set out on a mission to find an island where a precious treasure is hidden. But this island is alive and very dangerous because it behaves like a living organism. The vegetation attacks them and gobbles up one of the members of the group in front of Bonny and her mates. Meanwhile, another group of ferocious pirates called the Blackbeard also had their eyes on the treasure. So they attacked Bonny's mates and captured William and Mary. They thought they could get their hands on Anne Bonny, but they didn't have an idea about the treasure's real purpose. One of the most crucial parts of the treasure and the entire island was the Witchblade itself, and Anne was the only worthy one to wear it on her hand. As we saw, whoever tried to possess it other than Anne had their hands cut off. It was finally Anne who wielded it and killed those creepy pirates. Now in this anthology, there are many names across different timelines in history, like in ancient China, Japan, Babylon, the Middle East, and Egypt, where many women warriors had to confront their enemies before they finally embraced their true purpose in life. But in issue 3, we also got the story of Selena, who wielded the weapon in the future timeline. Now, the kind of obstacles Selena would overcome in this issue aren't very extraordinary, but it establishes the weapon's consistency. It controls the mind of the host, and it always chooses a woman as a host, even in the future, because women are more tolerant to pain than men can ever be. Witchblade's powers got more enhanced in issue 7, when it was used against a goddess. In ancient Egypt, where Princess Raquel got to know about her fiancé Shala's affair with the goddess Bastet, she encountered the god of the underworld, Anubis, who directed her to a cave where she found this magical artifact. This particular story proves that the weapon was powerful beyond any measure. Now, all of these events that took place in history didn't just happen randomly, because each of these women of the Witchblade was interconnected through a shared bloodline. It is said that these wielders are the same soul who reincarnates over and over again, and that's why, regardless of ethnicity, all these women look the same. They all somehow resemble the face of Sara Pezzini. Well, I have another interesting comic series to mention while talking about the historical bloodline, and that is Medieval Spawn / Witchblade, which is one of those few versions where the bloodline is connected to a large cosmic system in real time. Medieval Spawn Witchblade is a crossover comic series, a collaborative production by both Top Cow and Image Comics, and it presents the Witchblade within a medieval setting and connects with the Leader of Darkness. The story begins with Matthew Royale convincing Lord Cardinal and his Army of Darkness to invade the realm of Fury to gain unlimited power and control over the light. Cardinal invaded the realm and a massive war took place. During the same time, Katarina, a drifter in England, was chosen by Witchblade. So when the Darklings attacked her, she transformed into a fully armed being with the Witchblade operating her action. And then came the medieval Spawn, who fought against the darkness alongside her. Royale understood Witchblade's influence, so he tried to manipulate its powers and ensure it would take full control of Katarina. However, Spawn didn't let that happen and managed to sever the connection between her and the weapon. After getting back to her senses, Katarina and Spawn together fought against Cardinal and cut his head off from his body, but the head was still living like a separate individual. Royale took that opportunity to capture the living head of Cardinal and used the dark power to extend his life. In a future timeline, we still get to see Royale with a box, where the head of Cardinal lives rent-free. In the end, Katarina was freed from the battle of powers, but the Witchblade was still looking for future bearers across the cultures. Sara Pezzini, the main comic origin. Well before even the Witchblade 1995 comic series introduced its first ever origin story, there was another storyline where Sara Pezzini was first introduced in a short preview. This connects her first ever appearance in the Witchblade comic series and to the artifact. The series I'm talking about is Witchblade She, the Battle for Independence. The story basically has two tracks. In the main plot, She, also known as Anna Ishikawa, is captured by the Cyberdata Corporation, which turned her into a weapon. Witchblade, whose real name is Dominique Thibault, went to rescue her. Anna couldn't process it and saw Dominique as a threat, so she counterattacked her. And not just that, she also impaled a blade through her chest and killed her on the spot. But then Witchblade made his first ever appearance and got linked to Witchblade's body to resurrect her from the dead. This was the first time we came to know that Witchblade doesn't need the host's permission to enter the fight, as it can choose anyone and controls them in its own way. Another part of this same series was the Battle for Independence, a surreal meta battle where characters from different comics fight together against a large entity that absorbs energy to gain power. The fight was intense, and in the end, they finally overpowered it. In this fight as well, Witchblade appeared in the end to revive Witchblade and once again disappeared. Witchblade She didn't vividly feature this weapon, but by this issue, they established it as a sentient weapon that has a mysterious quality. Although Sara Pezzini didn't appear in the comics, the original series Witchblade began her story full-fledgedly. The very first issue begins by introducing the evil business tycoon Kenneth Irons, who is obsessed with something he cannot fully understand. And this is the Witchblade gauntlet, which is later revealed by him and his trusted partner, Ian Nottingham. He found this mysterious weapon in Greece, and much later in the series, it was revealed that he was a Templar knight who once drank from the Holy Grail, and it granted him immortality. And that's the reason why we got to see him even in the 19th century talking to Madame Valmont in Paris. Then we're introduced to the protagonist of our story, Sara Pezzini, who's dressing seductively to bust a gang of miscreants. There's a murder case at the Rialto Theater, and she was working on this case going undercover. Joining her in this mission, Michael Yee was her partner in solving crime. Whenever Sara appears in the first issue in her red short dress, she's not being cute or hot. She's busting some balls of some bad guys who stand no chance against her. Although her investigative style is questionable, she somehow gets the job done. Also, we got a vivid description of her dynamic with Yi. Although Yi doesn't approve of her investigative methods, he trusts her. Sara was pretty aggressive even before she was attracted to the gauntlet, as we saw her almost torturing the bad guys in the interrogation room. Now, for the first time, when Ian revealed the gauntlet Witchblade, it was revealed that they were looking for an apt customer in exchange for a hefty sum. And that customer was Tony Kuglani, who was desperate to wear the gauntlet on his hand. But just at the moment he tried it out, it burned his hand. Witchblade was actually scanning the whole environment and looking for its ideal wielder, and that was neither Kuglani nor Kenneth. Well, the opportunity came, but pretty tragically when Michael Yee got caught by Kenneth's men. Sara was hiding somewhere waiting for the right time to kick some ass, but Kenneth knew what would trigger the weapon, so he fired a bullet at Yee, and Sara instantly jumped out to save her partner. But both of them were mortally wounded, and for a moment it felt like this was the end for her, until her hand reached out to the gauntlet on the floor, and it instantly recognized its woman. Sara was healed by the Witchblade's powers, and her transformation occurred, fully covering her body with the Witchblade's armor. However, despite her revival, she couldn't save Michael Yee, who took his last breath in her arm. Danielle Baptiste, the chosen successor. In this comic series, by issue 100, Sara got pregnant with the child of light and darkness. And here I'm going to explain how this happened to her. So Jackie Estacado is going to be a very important figure for this look. He was a former hitman for a mafia gang called Franchetti, and there was a bond developed between Sara and him. But the tragic thing about Jake is that he was possessed by the darkness itself, and that changed him into a vicious monster. While Sara was severely injured by a past incident and was in a comatose state in the hospital, Jake, under the influence of darkness, had intercourse with her and got her pregnant. Meanwhile, Sara's relationship with with her partner Detective Gleason was budding, and Gleason was falling hard for his dream woman. But having a relationship with the Witchblade woman ain't easy, and it might get killed. Sara, after her recovery, confronted Jake, but he was no longer the Jake she knew. He had completely transformed into a non-human being. They had a terrible fight where Sara was almost on the brink of death, but Gleason came to save her. Sara put herself together and injured the darkness, which slowly got back to its initial shape, Jackie Estacado. By this time, Jake wanted an escape and freedom from this torment, so right at the moment when he realized this darkness was awakening inside him once again, he decided to end it for good. He shot himself to death, and Sara couldn't do anything to save him. Jake lost his life, but Gleason stood by her side and had his first kiss with a vulnerable and wounded Sara Pezzini. After that, in the firstborn issue, we saw Sara give up on the Witchblade and pass it to the new wielder, Danielle Baptiste, who was still learning how to operate the weapon. The firstborn is a single standalone issue that begins with Detective Gleason, Cliff, and other detectives investigating a burnt building, revealing that Sara is due in a few weeks. Then we're reintroduced to Jackie, and in this issue, he's not dead. He's reincarnated once again as the Darkness, and he rejoins the group of Franchetti. We saw him holding captives and interrogating them, and when this doesn't satisfy him, he unleashes the Darklings to eat them alive. However, at the same time, Angelus appeared with her team of light, and a battle ensued between these two equally powerful factions. The burnt bodies of the victims are nothing but the result of the intense energy of the light. Sara and her teammates found the burnt bodies, and while they carried out the probing, Jake eventually entered Sara's house and revealed the truth, that he's the father of Sara's unborn child. On the other hand, Danielle Baptiste is going through the same experiences that Sara once went through. Danny is a dance student, and she is pretty inexperienced with handling this blade. Meanwhile, the Angelus is looking for a perfect host to take over. Initially, they tried to take over one of Cyberforce's members, Velocity, but that didn't pan out properly, as the rest of the members quickly tamed her. So Angelus finally found the one they were looking for, the convicted murderer Celestine, who was imprisoned at the time. The more immediate reason Velocity didn't work was her unwillingness to surrender, but Celestine was elated by the offer, so she turned into the host of Angelus and hurried to capture Danielle, because only through her they would reach Sara and her child. Danielle was approached by Celestine on the road, but she refused to give in and instead made the mistake of alerting Sara about the threat. Sara was already mentally broken by the news that Jake was the father of her child, but it was quite relieving that Jake didn't come to claim the child. Rather, he wanted to protect her, because the unwanted guests had already arrived. Before Celestine could attack Sara and claim the child, Jake took them to a hideout. Danny also stayed with her like a human shield, but Gleason got shot in his abdomen, although he later survived his injury. He insisted that Sara move on as her labor pains had already started. Jake took them to an underground mob safe house in Jersey, where Sara went through immense labor pain and Danielle Baptiste stood by her side. The situation was terrible because there was no one to fight if Celestine arrived, so another important figure in this universe, Magdalena, stepped in. Magdalena had been previously informed by Sara, so she didn't waste any more time and quickly came to the scene to help her friend. But on her way, she met the emanation of dark and realized that Jake wasn't the leader of this faction. Rather, he was just a pawn in the larger game. Eventually, Celestine arrived and a massive battle took place between them. Magdalena tried her best to stop them. While inside the house, Danny finally delivered Sara's baby, but Sara was not responding for a while. When the battle between Mag and Celestine got huge, Sara finally entered wearing her Witchblade armor, carrying her girl child, Hope, in her arms. She was saved by the gauntlet's powers, but yet Celestine overpowered her and snatched the baby from her arm. But the end was not saved for the evil Angelus, because just when she grabbed the babe, Hope unleashed her powers from her eyes and torched Celestine to death. Even the entire place was burnt, and everyone except for Sara and her team was destroyed. Sara managed to save her baby, or rather, I should say, the baby was powerful enough to protect herself. But the tension didn't subside, because it wasn't Angelus who was destroyed, it was merely the host. And there was the lingering fear of the entire team of darkness coming for the baby again. In the rest of the issue, we saw many fights that Sara and Danny fought to protect Hope, and in each, they defeated their enemies and protected their baby. The TV series origin, 2001 to 2002. Alright, so a comic series so popular with a tortured female protagonist was screaming to become a live-action adaptation, which finally happened in 2000 when TNT launched a film as a pilot for the TV show. And trust me, the show was even better than the comic series. The show didn't unnecessarily eroticize Sara Pezzini. Rather, it gave her a more serious look by dialing down the fantasy a bit and adding more detective thriller elements. The film served as the proper origin story for Sara Pezzini's journey, and despite some changes, it doesn't differ much from the source. Sara is an NYPD detective who's ready to bend the rules in order to get her job done, and her partner is Danny Wu instead of Michael Yee. Now, Kenneth Irons and his superhuman, corrupted ally, Ian Nottingham, are the major threats in the story. Kenneth tries to manipulate Witchblade and its wielder, and just like the comics, the confrontation between him and Sara sets the stage for the main events. So Sara and Danny are working on this antique smuggling case, which led them to a museum where a massive shootout broke out. During this, both Danny and Sara are mortally wounded, while Sara gets attached to the gauntlet and is transformed into the armored warrior. Witchblade Gauntlet retains that comic look, but the armor we saw in the show was way different than the almost naked look of Sara in the comics. However, tragedy struck here as well, as Danny was killed in the film. Ever since, Sara began to see Danny's ghost, who spiritually guides her in her endeavors in Season 1. As the first season progresses, Sara goes through visions of past wielder and the history of the Gauntlet's origin, and in between, she fights her fights against the enemies. Across the cultures, the Witchblade is also known as the Digitabulum Magiae, or the Witch's Finger, and it helps Sara to gain many kinds of supernatural abilities like bullet deflection, manipulating time, and healing herself from the deadly wounds. The show reinterpreted the mythology of Witchblade in multiple instances, while it sometimes subtracted some parts that were there in the comics, and sometimes added some more to it. It introduces another weapon called the Lance of Longinus, which only chooses a male wielder who can put it on and operate it. Sara continued losing those who were close to her, and there were multiple times when she thought of giving up on that weapon. But every time, she reconsiders, thinking that with the help of the weapon, she can really bring some changes that she wouldn't be able to do without it. The pattern becomes so visible to her because every time she gets into a fight, and Witchblade helps her to win, she defeats her enemies, but in return, her relationships deteriorate, and even at some point, things escalated to the point where she even fought against her doppelganger in the episode titled Palindrome. But the main twist appears in the season finale, when the time was reset due to the Gauntlet's influence. As time rewinds, it becomes possible to undo the deaths of her former friends and partners. Like in Season 2, Episode 1, called Destiny, we saw Danny come back to life once again. He was being buried alive by Kenneth Irons' employee, Christina, but just before his air ran out, Sara managed to find him and rescue his life. The world was transformed for Sara, but she remembered all the memories of the present time, and she understood that she was the one who lived through the consequences of Witchblade. So even though Danny returned, she couldn't confide in him about the powers of the Gauntlet, and that's why there was a subtle rift between the two throughout the second season. So when the time is reset in Episode 1 of Season 2, Kenneth finally died, but that was not the end of his arc, as he remained a spirit lingering around in the mortal world, still trying to gain control over Sara. So he possessed Ian Nottingham and hired a group of goons named the Black Dragons to kill her. By the end of the episode, Sara gave up on the weapon and found a new wielder to operate it. But in the end, many questions were left unresolved. Season 2 basically ended while leaving some anticipation for the next season, but the show was canceled because of many production-related reasons, and mainly for the actress Yancy Butler, who went to rehab for her alcoholism. Ever since, no one really talked about reimagining Sara for the live-action show or a movie. Maybe keeping the true essence of the comics is a bit risky a job for the showrunners. The anime origin. Masane Amaha, 2006. Now that we've covered a large part of the comic and live-action adaptations of the Witchblade lore and Sara Pezzini's journey, let's go beyond the typical American versions and see how global media reinterprets her stories. In 2006, there was an anime show featuring the lore of Witchblade, but completely tweaking the story and introducing a new protagonist called Masane Amaha. Now, this version is way more tragic and intimate than the previous versions we talked about. Gonzo has produced this show, which is perhaps the most radical take on this fantasy-based lore. The story is set in Tokyo in a near-future timeline, and the tone is pretty apocalyptic because an earthquake has ravaged the whole city. Then we're introduced to our protagonist, Masane Amaha, who's not a detective like Pezzini, but a clumsy young single mother who ended up with her newborn child, Ryuhoko, amid the Great Quake. 6 years later, she returned to Tokyo to live with Ryuhoko, but she was caught in the battles of power against the corporate giant Doji Group and NSWF. Now, her transformation is also very different from the one we saw in the comics or in the series. Here, Witchblade is more than just an organic weapon. It feels like a parasitic transformation that turns Masane's eyes dark red, and her hair becomes crimson. Also, her body gets covered by metallic armor as usual. Here, as well, Witchblade acts on its own instincts, almost becoming an empathic weapon that doesn't need permission from its wielder. Meanwhile, the truth is revealed when we learn that Reina Soho, who is a first-generation clone blade, was Rihoko's actual biological mother. Similarly, by episodes 13 and 14, Masane comes to find out that her real identity was Yasuko Ohara, who was connected to the government scheme involving the Witchblade. It was also revealed that it was Rihoko, not Masane, who would be the future host of this weapon. Parallelly, another more powerful antagonist story emerges in the story. Her name is Maria, who is a second-generation clone blade. Her psychological aspect was very unstable, and that's why her powers were chaotic and destructive on a large scale. Meanwhile, NSWF was led by the manipulative Tatsuoki Furumizu, and under his tenure, the internal corrupted politics was exposed, and it clearly reveals why their scientific pursuit to create Witchblade was harmful for the world, because none of these bioengineered weapons were as stable as the organic powers of Witchblade. And that's why, in the name of gaining more power, the corporate giants were sacrificing their women, treating them as mere guinea pigs, and ultimately losing them in the battles, as if they were nothing but expendables. The tone of the show was tragic and brooding from the start, and it ended exactly the same way. As I said before, Witchblade in this season is more than just a mythological bond with its wielder. It's a curse that slowly consumes the one who wears it. And Masane felt that long ago, as Witchblade slowly turned into an addiction. She also knew that if it were passed down to her daughter, something similar would happen to Rihoko. So she made sure it would. By episodes 22 and 24, we saw Masane losing her body, as it constantly fails under the influence of this weapon. So she makes a decision in the climax of the series. When Witchblade is at its peak and Masane is done with fighting the enemies, she lets it fully consume her. Her body crystallized and began to disintegrate. She sacrificed herself along with the destruction of the weapon so that Rihoko could be freed from this curse. The manga origin. Witchblade Takeru, 2006. Next up, the origin story I'm about to discuss is the manga version of Witchblade, which is wielded by a 15-year-old Japanese schoolgirl, Takeru Ibaraki. The manga was first published in 2006, written by Yasuko Kobayashi and illustrated by Kazasa Sumita, and continued for some chapters. In the very first chapter, we were introduced to a whole new interpretation of Witchblade's story, and it's nothing like the American or Western occult mythology previously shown in the comics and the live-action show. The manga has some connection to the anime TV show, but on rare occasions. However, before I start explaining the events of this manga, let me be clear about the nature of this story. Takeru's manga is an extremely eroticized and grotesque take on Witchblade's lore, and it contains too many graphic images, even exceeding what was in the original comics. It seems like Kobayashi took it to a whole new level and almost made a hentai manga out of it. So, the story begins with a hellish nightmare where Takeru sees herself wielding the armor and harming herself in a pretty disturbing way. As she wakes up scared, she begins to question these visions. The next morning, her grandma asks her if she has gone to the storehouse alone, because she was strictly forbidden to go there. But instead of blatantly listening to her, Takeru asks what was inside that room. Then we were introduced to her friend and a potential love interest, Houkun, who was the descendant of the Japanese demon hunters family, the one who had hunted demons for centuries. Now, after she returned from her school, she was shocked to find a bloody scene within her house. Her grandfather was slain and her grandma was terribly injured, and just in front of her stands a terrifying monster called an Oni, one of the demons who resemble the Darklings of the Darkness we saw in the comics. Even Kou came to save her, but right at that moment, Takeru had a surreal transformation in her body. Her entire body gets covered in an extremely revealing green-scaled metallic armor with a green demonic arm holding a large sword. But the way she uses the sword was quite graphic and unsettling. She managed to slay the demons, but then she got so close to Kou that Kou couldn't even recognize his friend anymore. She was completely transformed, and her thirst for blood and chaos grew even stronger, until she came back to her senses once again and transformed back into her normal shape as Takeru. Takeru and her grandma, Sister Shenshu, were both injured and resting, while Kou's father, Akeno, came to visit the elderly woman. There, he reveals something shocking that changes the whole origin story behind Witchblade. He reveals that long years ago, when their ancestor demon hunters slayed a vicious monster with their sword, the arm of that monster got separated from its body and was kept inside a sacred temple until a rumor of robbery claimed that the arm was stolen. But that wasn't truly the case, because 20 years ago, the daughter of Sister Shenxi, discovered the arm as an artifact while studying abroad and brought it home, and ever since, the existence of this weapon has been kept secret by her. Years later, now Takeru has mistakenly reawakened it because it was her bloodline that was responsible for it. She was actually a half-Oni for being the daughter of the demon leader Hogan, and that's why she was the most capable of wearing the demon hand in the fight. But yet, the Witchblade arm is slowly consuming her since the moment she wielded it. After that, there came many moments where Takeru, in her Witchblade armor, got confronted by the leader of the demons, and she managed to overpower them. But Ko-kun couldn't stay quiet after seeing these fights and how it was affecting his friend, so he stepped in to help her. In a final battle in the corridors of the hospital, when Ko-kun stood by her side in a fight against a brutal monster, Takeru asked him to kill her if she eventually turned into a demon. In the final moments, the demon captured Takeru and began to exploit her body, slowly consuming her so that she could fully abandon her humanity and become a slave of the darkness. But at that moment, Ho stepped in to slay the demon, and Takeru was free. Although it was a temporary win because her arm was still bonded with the bracelet form of Witchblade, and with the right time, it will activate again. In latter chapters of the series, she fought many fights, and her hunger for blood grew so by the end of the series, Ho eventually amputated her hand to stop the rampage. Sara Pezzini, the 2024 reboot origin. Well, as we have reached the end of the video, let's finish the discussion with the most recent version of this lore, the 2024 adaptation of the Witchblade comics, written by Marguerite Bennett, completely reimagined Sara's journey through a noir crime lens in a more brooding, dark New York City that takes on the aesthetic of Gotham City. Sara isn't sexualized here, and rather, she looks like a proper detective doing her job pretty seriously. The story begins with her narrating the incident. She says that in just a few moments, she's gonna be dead because there's a gun pointed at her head, metaphorically. Her past was riddled with the tragedy of her father's murder at the hands of a mafia gang, and now she seeks revenge by investigating a criminal cabal trafficking humans across city. For the investigation, she's going undercover, working for the gang, where she has to prove her loyalty and get to kill a rival gangster named Man to remain in her position in the group. Now that's the biggest challenge for Pezzini because she doesn't want to kill a man necessarily. Meanwhile, we're also reintroduced to Kenneth and Ian, who are trying to unleash the power of the Witchblade among the people so it can reach Sara and they can once again control the weapon and its wielder. As the power was spreading among the people through a woman affected by the blade, Sara was faced with an ultimatum. She would have to gun down the captured criminal, Man. Man wasn't an innocent soul as he had killed many, so he kinda deserved the death sentence. In this moment, when Sara was contemplating her decision, trying to justify the kill, the power got to her and she transformed into a Witchblade warrior in the middle of the whole thing. Her full body was covered by this metallic bladed armor with the red gem shining on her chest. She got laser eyes that can take anyone out to death. The armor is less erotic and very subtly revealing, making her look almost like a DC superhero. Anyway, at the end, she killed the man in front of her and didn't spare the rest of the members, almost destroying the whole place and rescuing the trapped people inside an ambulance who were about to get trafficked by this gang. Well, Witchblade is kind of a supernatural fantasy lore that inspired writers and comic illustrators all across the world, and that's why comic nerds have a soft spot for this special artifact and its bearers. Even beyond the origin stories I discussed in this video, there are more comic issues where Witchblade returned again and again. But this video is over right here, so if you have liked this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, please let us know in the comments about your favorite origin story. Until then, goodbye and see you in the next one.